Welcome back to Green Mountain Mornings on KVT Talk, where Brattleboro listens. 24 minutes past the top of the hour, and I'm your host, Olga Peters. And just before I bring my guest, Randy Holhut from the Commons, back onto the show, I want to remind folks that this segment of Green Mountain Mornings is being filmed by Brattleboro Community Television, and they will be posting it online later today at brattleboro.tv. And sponsorship of Green Mountain Mornings tonight is provided by Brattleboro Savings and Loan. So, Randy, there was a student walkout nationwide this week on March 14th. When we were off air, you were providing some statistics around gun violence. And before we start talking about the rally, I would really love to frame this conversation with those statistics.
This is from a column that was in the Globe, Boston Globe this morning by Richard North Patterson. He whipped out a few of these statistics. In all the wars from the Revolutionary War to Iraq and Afghanistan, about more than 1.2 million Americans have died on battlefields. Since 1968, the last year that the federal there have been strict new laws on firearms in the United States. That was right after the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. 1.5 million Americans have died, either by murder, by suicide, or by accident. Mm. So we've lost more people in the last 50 years from firearms violence than the last 250 years on battlefields from Lexington and Concord to Mosul and Kabul.
Wow.
Or 40,000 people a year die from guns. Or as you pointed out when we were talking off the air, that's almost the population of Windham County. Mm-hmm. And once again, murder, suicide, accident.
Right. So in that light, you actually were able to attend the rally at BUHS on Wednesday. What was your takeaway?
These kids are serious. Mm-hmm. These kids are, when you frame it in those terms, that not just in the classroom, but on everywhere else, that your odds of dying go up exponentially if there's a gun in the house.
Right.
Either you're going to kill yourself, or you're going to be killed by somebody in the house, or you're going to kill yourself by accident. Mm-hmm. Those numbers are proven. Mm-hmm. For all the instances where a firearm can be legitimately used for self-defense, the figure for one study was cited. For every one time that a weapon's used for justifiable defense, another 36 times it's not. It's used to kill somebody, or kill either yourself or somebody else.
Wow, that's pretty significant.
So, and you're more likely to die from kill yourself if there's a gun in the house. I speak from some experience in that. I've lost 2 nephews that way. Mm-hmm. You're more likely to shoot yourself by accident if you have a gun in the house, just playing around with it, because not everyone follows all the rules. Always treat it if it's loaded. Don't point it at somebody, and the rest of the safe firearms rules. So these kids were really, they meant it, and they're not going to be turned back. And I just got the feeling of watching these kids that, I was a part watching a historic moment. Granted, this was only a third of the student body, but there were 100 other adults there to cheer them on. And this was a moment that I think would be comparable to, Birmingham, Alabama after the church bombing. That killed the 4 girls. Mm-hmm. This was Selma after the riot, the police riot on the Pettus Bridge, where the police were beating the peaceful marchers. Mm-hmm. this is a watershed moment. The kids across the country, there were more than 1 million who walked out of schools. From one lone kid in one school in the South who was the only one who walked out, to kids I was reading in Arkansas who that they were disciplined for doing the walkout, and this was down in Arkansas where you can use corporal punishment, and they were given their choice of what they wanted to take for punishment, and they chose to be beaten by the teachers rather than take a suspension.
Huh. Okay.
These kids are hardcore, and they mean it because this is their lives. This is their reality. They've known nothing but active shooter drills.
Right.
They've known nothing but seeing police and sheriffs in the halls. They've known nothing but just story after story after story after story after story of mass shootings, from movie theaters to concerts to nightclubs to classrooms.
Right.
And this is serious. This is not as existential as some say. When I was growing up, we were hiding under the desk because we were afraid the Russians were going to drop a nuclear bomb on us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was maybe a scary time, but this is even scarier because it's random.
Right.
You don't know where it's coming from. It's not predictable.
Mm-hmm.
And the good news is that this wasn't a one-off thing. There's going to be another gathering up in Montpelier next Saturday, and the students are already getting their rides lined up and signing up people to go up there. It's part of a nationwide march of people trying to call attention to the laxity of our gun laws.
And of course, we do have some legislation moving through the State House at this moment. But yes, it's so easy. I think what I really appreciate about these students is that it's easy to be shocked, like we were in Vermont by the near miss in Fairhaven, and then kind of once the adrenaline wears down, it's easy to just slip back into, oh, well, it didn't happen. And I appreciate that these students are keeping the pressure on so that we don't forget and we do take action. Yeah,
and that they're willing to put their bodies against the wheel to stop it. They know what's needed. They're not afraid. They're calling BS on the politicians right now.
Yep.
They're not afraid of the NRA. They're not afraid of the gun lobby.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they've these kids, in Brattleboro you could say is, they're just a child of all the crazy hippies. No, they're not. These are people who are a generation who've lived under the threat of death.
And on that note,
it's been normalized that this is how it is. People are going to die in school, but for freedom.
Right. No. Yeah, I do agree that the normalization of this of mass shootings in public places, not just schools, but in general in this country, is it has to stop. There's times to accept the new normal, like after Irene, when we had to accept that climate change was, yes, hitting Vermont. But there are some new normals that do not need to be accepted. We are back with Green Mountain Mornings on KVT Talk, where Brattleboro listens. 40 minutes past the top of the hour. I'm your host, Olga Peters, and Mr. Randy Holhut from the Commons. Happy Sunshine Week.
Well, we didn't have a lot of Sunshine Week, but yes, it is Sunshine Week, and that's that one week of the year where we call attention as members of the press to the problem of openness in government and having the people for whom the government is who are the government, and who our elected representatives are there to act on our behalf as our employees, getting public access to the information we need to govern as a democracy. In other words, public access to records and meetings and documents and other things. And as you know from being a municipal reporter in Vermont, sometimes it can be very difficult to get that information.
It can be, because here's the tricky thing about Vermont's right to know laws, which are the open document and open meeting laws. On one level, Vermont's laws are extremely open, and they are biased towards transparency, that everything is presumed public unless there is an exemption. But here's the trick. There are 280 exemptions in the Vermont right to know laws that block people from getting information.
And that the explanation of the exemptions was longer than the law itself.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom Carney, who used to be the editor of the Keene Sentinel for many years, and now is running a group of weekly newspapers up in the Stowe, Vermont area,
right,
is contributed a column for the Voices section this week for Sunshine Week, talking about the Public Records Act. Now, this isn't Tom's first rodeo. He's been involved in more than 100 legal actions on behalf of open meeting laws. So he knows about what the law is, and he's been one of the leading editors in Vermont in trying to get the legislature to back off on the exemptions and make the public records law actually public. Mm-hmm. And it's slow going because, of course, the default position, if you're a politician, is I don't want people to know what the hell I'm doing. The default position is I want to keep the light off as long as possible.
Right. There's an adage, for those who don't know it, in the journalism industry that sunshine is the best disinfectant.
Well, actually, that comes not from a journalist, but that comes from a Supreme Court justice. That's Louis Brandeis said those words. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. I
had not known that. Thank you, Randy.
And, because that's a very famous quote and a very, very true adage, that once you turn the light on,
you see all the little critters.
Then you see what's going on. And, of course, on the federal level, we're seeing more and more of darkness settling upon our federal agencies, of websites being scrubbed of information deemed inconvenient, of regulations to make it more difficult to get information from federal agencies, from not even releasing your tax returns like most. But fortunately, there are other ways of getting it, and the investigation by Special Prosecutor Mueller into the Trump business is moving apace, and part of that is the use of the subpoena to try and to force these documents out in the open.
When I did my fellowship with the New England First Amendment Institute in 2013, we hosted a number of investigative reporters from papers and news outlets from across the country. And they were talking about FOIA, which is the Federal Open Meeting Law, Federal Information Act. And there was one reporter, she had been trying to get information, I believe it was from the Department of Justice, and she had been waiting for 10 years. 10 years of filing FOIA after FOIA after FOIA, and they would come back with, well, we can give you maybe this part of the information, but we're not going to give you that part. And she'd be like, but all of it's public, so why not give me all of the parts? And it's been 10 years of that.
And that's the just one example of how reporters get jerked around by by various agencies or federal officials or local officials on for access. And there are towns that don't quite get their release their meeting minutes within the allotted time.
Right.
There are towns that when they do release the meeting minutes, they look like a log rather than an actual narrative of what happened at the meeting.
And you can't always tell what the actual, the main purpose of the minutes is for people to know if there were votes, what the results of the votes were. And there are some meeting minutes you can't even tell that.
And, that's one important role that the BCTV and Fact TV in the northern part of our listening area up in Bells Falls area does is, having a camera there at the meeting so you can actually see the sausage being made.
Yes. Yep.
But there's still the thing about executive sessions, and there's exemptions for that. But you're supposed to have those meetings, those meeting minutes available after a certain interval.
Right.
And that's not always honored, too. And it just seems that more and more, as the press comes under attack by the unscrupulous who want to belittle our role as the people's representative.
And just to be fair, it's not only the Trump administration that has pulled this.
Yeah, the Scott administration has done some of this stuff, too. And, and everybody wasn't always chummy with chummy.
Nope. And Obama was not always as transparent as he could have been.
No. Power and secrecy are kind of go hand in hand. They go skipping down the lane together.
Happy little friends.
Happy little friends, because, secrecy reinforces power.
Yeah. Yep. The one I always bump up against when I was doing a lot of municipal coverage is, according to Secretary of State Jim Condos, he feels that public money should have public information attached to it. And I used to bump up against all the nonprofits in Brattleboro, many of them who were like, yeah, but we're a private nonprofit, so even though we took public funds, we don't necessarily have to be accountable for what we're using that money for.
Like hell.
And it's like, no. This is public taxpayer money. You have to tell people what you're doing with it. Oh, but we're a private nonprofit. Used to make
like I said,
crazy.
Like hell. You can't.
Right.
And, that's... the retreat can try and pull that stuff, but, they're getting state money now. So they're, the Brattleboro retreat now getting state money to take care of state patients has a level of accountability you didn't have before.
Yeah. They've had a hard time adjusting to that, too.
The Brattleboro Memorial Hospital is taking federal money because it's getting special funding from the federal government to stay open because it's deemed a critical access healthcare facility.
Right.
So when they say, "Oopsie, we couldn't account for $1.6 million,"
guess what?
Yeah, you can't just kind of slough that off without an explanation.
Well, and I think going back to what we were talking about at the top of the hour, that's one of the weaknesses I think anyways, in the Vermont right to know laws, is there's a lot of those exemptions kind of allow municipalities and other people taking public funds to kind of wiggle out into gray areas after the fact. So like when you go to them and say, hey, shouldn't this meeting have been public? Oh, well, maybe, but since there's this exemption and that exemption, well, we don't have to do it.
And especially when you consider that the fine for the violation of the open meeting law or the public records law is like $100.
Yeah, it's really. It doesn't have a lot of teeth.
It doesn't even have gums.
No. It's not even teething yet, let's face it.
Well, to Jim Condo's credit, and he's established himself, I think, as one of the leading secretaries of state in the country in terms of standing up for open access to information, as well as for open access to the polling place.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the other half of the Democratic equation,
right?
The small d Democratic,
yep,
of being able to vote without having restrictions placed upon you.
Mm-hmm.
That this means something. You can't have a democracy and have your public officials operating in secret.
Right. Which brings me to another point. You know, in a lot of open meeting laws, including Vermont, there's usually some kind of language that says saving a public official from embarrassment is not a good reason to keep something private. And
Yep.
I think that also reminds us as a community and as a culture that we need to, A, expect transparency from our leaders, but also when they are transparent, to make sure that we ourselves don't go on witch hunts or just kind of burn them at the stake without us getting full information as well.
Yeah, that before you start taking to the Twitter machine accusing people of doing something
right.
horrible, that you might want to read it first.
Right, right. Because we want to reinforce that transparency is a good thing. So yes, get full information.
And making decisions based on facts rather than emotion is a good thing too.
That does tend to help. Yes. Mm-hmm. Especially when we have to make decisions that affect many, many people.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Randy, as always, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, and we'll talk next time.
Looking forward to it. Take care.